lectionary texts, there are several to choose from. Psalm 30 was one of them. And so it's this joy that comes in the morning. And then there's the scripture from Acts where Saul had his eyes opened in Paul. And then there's this account from the book of John. The very last chapter, John 21. I'll read you verses 1 to 19. And it says, "Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee." This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the Twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "Well, we'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw your nets on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, where he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. "Now, come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he had been raised from the dead. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know that I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Well, yes, Lord, you know that I love you," Peter said. "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus replied. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Well, Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go." Jesus said this to him to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, "Follow me." Now there's a lot in this story. We could talk about this for weeks because there are so many differences that we can dig into. Differences in languages, ideas of does this belong in John? Was this added later? Why did this come after the resurrection appearances? And like John wrapped up the book in chapter 20. Well, then we have chapter 21. So where did it come from? Well, there's a lot of debate in the biblical scholarship about does this fit? And the bottom line is we have all of the manuscripts of John that we have include this. So it's been there for a very long time. So let's just accept that it's part of the story and not some random thing that they added on in the end. This is written by John as well. It calls the beloved disciples. Well, there's two big choices. It's either John or James. Well, James is martyred very early, so this is attributed to John as the writer. So this whole story is added on, more than likely written by John, very early on in the history. Not written by John, but written by that followers of John. And so here's this story, happening on the Sea of Tiberias. If depending on what translation of the Bible you have, it'll say the Sea of Tiberias or the Sea of Galilee. It's the same thing. The Sea of Galilee is 70 miles from Jerusalem. Now, this is happening right after the resurrection. So Jesus and the disciples had all been in Jerusalem for the triumphal entry and the Last Supper and the crucifixion and the resurrection, and they had stayed there for that week of unleavened bread. So they've been to Jerusalem, but now they're going home to Canaan, or excuse me, to Galilee. 70 miles. And just to give you an idea of distance, if you walk 4 miles an hour, which I would be impressed if I could do that, it would take you 17 and a half hours of walking to get there. All right, so it's going to take you a couple of days. Because who's going to walk 17 and a half hours straight? Even if you're in the best shape of your life, I don't think that I could do that. So it's taken them several days to get back to Galilee. Now the Sea of Galilee is beautiful. In that part of the world, they have these amazing things. They call them hills and mountains. If you've never seen them, Google mountains. They're gorgeous. You know, when we live in West Ohio, it's like floods of pancake. And so the Sea of Galilee is this gorgeous place, and around the lake there are these different settlements. Tiberias is one of them. But the Sea of Galilee, now I had it in my head that the Sea of Galilee is quite a large body of water because it's, you know, it's a sea. Well, how big do you think the Sea of Galilee is? It's the size of Grand Lake. Just a little bigger. Just a little bit bigger, but roughly it's the size of Grand Lake. Now, it's infinitely deeper, but it's not a whole lot bigger than Grand Lake. That just blew me away. So 140 feet is how deep the Sea of Galilee is at its deepest part when it's completely full. So you can imagine that they're not fishing out in the middle with their nets. They're fishing up close to shore. It says about 100 yards away. So picture that you're out at Ben's Landing, having a tenderloin. You want some fresh fish, not from this lake. And you see them out there fishing. And you say, "Hey boys, got any fish?" You can see out 100 yards, right? 300 feet, that's not a stretch of the imagination. But here's the question. Why exactly are these disciples, these followers of Jesus, these men who have seen Jesus risen from the dead, they've met the resurrected Christ 3 times, right? Why are they out there fishing? Why did they return to their old jobs instead of continuing the work that Jesus had called them to? Didn't all the disciples used to be fishermen? Now this would have been a very comfortable thing for them to do. Kind of a return to normalcy after a week and a half of pure insanity. But I don't think that they were really returning to their old jobs. At least I hope not. I mean, they fished all night long and didn't catch a stinking thing. That's not really good for your, yeah, that's not good for you. But I think they went away just to gather their thoughts, to regroup, to catch up. You know, sometimes after it's been a rough week, you just want to go back to something that you know, something that's really familiar. I call it brain dead work because I can just do it. Like, I like to vacuum the house because it takes absolutely zero brain power for me to vacuum the house. And I can think through whatever is going on in my head. My wife knows when it's been a rough day because she comes home and like the house is immaculate. I'll have dusted, I'll cleaned the vacuumed and cleaned the bathroom, and she's like, "Oh boy, Matt's had a bad day." So it's how I process, and I think that's what the disciples were doing. Jesus had said, "Go back to Galilee and I'll meet you there." Well, they just did what he was told. And I think sometimes the disciples get a bad rap. Were the disciples the smartest people in the world? I don't think so. But I think that they were just going back to the sense of normalcy. They were waiting on Jesus to come and visit them in Galilee. And can you imagine, okay, I'm waiting for the Lord, I'm just going to stand here and wait. Yeah, we don't do that well, do we? They're not going to just stand there and twiddle their thumbs. So they go and they do something. And you know what, no matter what, they still had to eat. So they're looking for lunch or breakfast. So here are the disciples out on the lake. Now fishing in those days, they didn't really consist of poles and lines and sinkers and jigs and hooks and worms and minnows and everything but the kitchen sink. I went fishing with my grandpa as a kid. We had the biggest stinking tackle box that they sold at that time, and it was completely full of everything. And we didn't use any of it. Instead, they used nets. It took too long to catch fish one at a time to feed a family, so they used this net. Now there are several types of nets, but the ones that the disciples were probably using at this point was a cast net. They'd have a small team of men assembled. It was a circular net, It had stones tied around the bottom. They were experts, but they would take it and they would throw it in like a parachute, and it would sink down. And then you would have to jump into the lake, swim down, either take the fish out, put them in a pouch, or gather the net and swim back up. And so did you catch where it said that Peter had to get dressed again? Well, that's because you fish naked. I know, that's not something that I want to be doing. But that was the common way that you did it. And so, if they're constantly jumping in and out of the water, first of all, they're going to be exhausted. And second of all, who wants to carry around that extra weight? So they're out there fishing, and all of a sudden they hear a shout from shore, asking if they caught any fish. If you look at verse 5, the terminology is interesting. Now, depending on your translations, it could call them lads, or children, or friends, or boys. Now, this was not a derogatory term. This was a term of familiarity. This was a father-son relationship. This was a teacher-student thing. Now, it might have been too dark for them to have seen who said it, but they would have known. That's somebody we know very well. And they would have reacted to that. Now, if I'm out fishing and somebody says, try over there, I'm like, really? I mean, don't you love it? You're out fishing, you've been fishing in this one spot, and they say, oh, you need to go 10 feet down the shore and try down there. So I pick up my stuff, I go 10 feet down the shore, guess what? I still don't catch a stinking fish. We'll just go down a few more feet. Guess what? I still don't catch a stinking fish. So here are these disciples, these professional fishermen. They've been fishing all night long. They're going around the lake trying to catch these fish. And some smart aleck on the shore says, just fish on the other side of the boat. Now, in my skeptic mind, I'm going to be like, yeah, right. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, nothing on that side of the boat. Because on that side of the boat, I catch them on this side of the boat. But they just do it. Right? And there's no dialogue here about if they said anything. It's like they just picked up the net. I imagine a lot of eye rolling going on here. Oh, like a fish on the other side of the boat, right? And they take that net and they cast it out there, and then almost immediately the net is too full for them to even lift back up. And so they're dragging it, loaded with these fish, back to shore. And it's at this point that the beloved disciple, more than likely John, says, it's the Lord. From the language, and they know that Jesus was coming, it's a pretty safe assumption. And that's when Peter does just what Peter always does. Without even thinking, he throws on his clothes, he wants to cover up his nudeness, and he jumps into the sea to swim to shore. Now, I'm just thinking here, like you're on a boat, why do you jump off the boat to swim to shore? I mean, isn't the whole boat going to come in to see who Jesus is? Don't all of the disciples want to hear the next things? Well, once again, Peter jumps the gun, he gets a little crazy, and he wants to be the first one to get to Jesus. The first one. And so he leaves his friends with a net full of fish in a boat 100 yards from shore. So the rest of the disciples are stuck cleaning up this mess, dragging in this fish, all the while Peter is swimming to shore. I can't imagine that Peter got to shore that much quicker than the boat. I can't imagine swimming 300 feet or a boat rowing 300 feet. It just makes sense in my mind. The boat's going to get there about the same time. But anyways, Peter gets there and Jesus is there cooking this breakfast. And it's important that Jesus is cooking because even from the time of the resurrection, the story going around is that the Jesus that people saw wasn't the real bodily form of Jesus. It might have been a ghost, or an image, or a hallucination. You know, I'm thinking Star Wars. It could have been a hologram shined up from R2-D2. But the bottom line was, we just watched the new Star Wars movie. It was pretty good. The bottom line is that people were like, you didn't see the real resurrected Jesus. You know, even Thomas put his hand in his wounds. You know, so they knew. But the whole thing was, you didn't see the real Jesus. Well, friends, have you ever seen a ghost cook? So this was important because they say, not only did we see Jesus, but he cooked us breakfast. When's the last time you ever heard of a ghost or an image cooking breakfast? And so Jesus was kind of laying this all out like, here I am. But they didn't even recognize Jesus. So John includes this whole story so that they can say, hey, we saw Jesus. real, in bodily form, because he cooked us breakfast. And the awesome link in this story that I think is that even after Jesus entered into his holiness, into his perfection, into this perfect body, that he is still out there serving others. Jesus isn't like, hey, where's my breakfast? Jesus is out there like, hey, I've got your breakfast. The Son of God, risen to the right hand of the Father, cooked them breakfast. They'd been fishing all night. They would have been tired and hungry and wet and smelly. And so here's their friend Jesus, ready with a hot meal for them. So then Jesus wants a little bit more fish. They must have been really hungry. And so he sends Peter back for some of the fish so that he can add them to the fish that he had already cooked. Now the number listed is 153 fish. Now, if you look at scholarship, you could fill this room with all of the articles and stories written about what is so important about this number. Here's the bottom line. It was a lot of fish. It didn't tear the net. There's not really, depending on which scholar you look at, the number has not a whole lot of significance. But it was just a large number. So can we just go that it was a bunch of fish? And Jesus invites them to this breakfast. Now these disciples, they must have been a little spooked, a little uneasy. Because look, it says, no one wanted to ask this person who it was. That they all knew that it was Jesus. But something must have been different. I mean, imagine, Jesus hasn't been gone that long, and yet they're like, who is this guy? Is it the Lord? But they didn't want to ask, is this Jesus? It had been less than 2 weeks, so they wouldn't have forgotten him from the crucifixion. But the difference must be that Jesus has changed somehow. He's no longer just the same person they ate dinner with in the upper room. But that Jesus has risen from the dead. Something about him has changed. And Jesus is preparing them for this next journey of life. The journey that he gives them at the ascension. You know what that journey is? To go and make disciples of all nations. But before he can give them those words, he has to do some work with Peter. Peter, that gun-shy, quick-tempered, fiery guy. So Jesus asked that question to Peter. One question 3 times. Simon, son of John, do you love me? 3 times. Now, what is significant about Jesus asking Peter this question 3 times? Yeah. Peter denied Jesus 3 times in the temple court. So this is Jesus' way of saying, Peter, I've got this. You are forgiven. You are part of the team. And, it's like, did Jesus do this in front of the other disciples or away from him? I think that Jesus would have done it right there. Because part of what Peter had to overcome is that the disciples knew that Peter betrayed Jesus. So I think the disciples needed to understand that, hey, Peter's still part of this thing. And we still need to be a part of Peter, and we still need to follow his leadership. And then I think that Jesus was recommissioning Peter for the work that Jesus had called him to do. And because do you see how Jesus calls Peter? Does he call him Peter? He calls him Simon, his old name. So this is this whole idea of the renaming of Peter, of getting it all back straight. And Jesus wants to make sure that Peter is ready to do the job that he has called him to do. The role that all of the disciples are called to do. Because before they were called to be strictly evangelists, to tell others all about Jesus. Jesus was the guy who did most of the healing and the miracles. Now the disciples did. They cast out demons, they healed the sick. But here is Jesus, and he's adding to this role. No longer is Peter just the evangelist, but Peter is now also the pastor. To feed and to care for the very children of God. Now Peter is ticked off. He's heard that Jesus would ask him the same question 3 times. And the 3rd time, Peter really just says, you know everything. You know that I love you. Can you hear the exasperation in Peter's voice? Like, Jesus, you know everything. You know that I love you. And so Jesus says, feed my sheep. I tell you that you are going to do amazing things, but other people are going to lead you to. This is not a different commission than anybody else. Peter has the same job as the rest of the disciples. It's all about reuniting Peter after the denial. It's all about telling the other disciples that Jesus is still part of this team, to trust in his leadership. Jesus goes to all this work so that the disciples know he is risen from the dead and that there is still a job to do. And that job is still the same today. So my question to you, friends, is do you have any fish? You've been up fishing all night long, and do you have any fish? Jesus calls us to be fishers of people. To grow our nets big, to reach those that God is calling us to reach. Jesus is standing on the shore. He's ready to feed them. We don't have to feed them. We don't have to clean them. All we have to do is catch them. But I think sometimes we're a lot like Peter. We jump the gun. We throw on the clothes to cover up our nudeness and our insecurities and our garbage. And we jump into the water without really understanding what's going on in our life. We get too excited and we lose sight of the people that we are supposed to bring with us. And we leave the boat full of friends and the net full of fish behind. Sometimes we need to stay in the boat. We need to be a part of everything that's going on around us. Jesus has the grace and the understanding needed to forgive us for everything. To send us on the best fishing trip in the world. In my mind, that's catching one of those big sailfish out in Florida. That sounds like a lot of fun. So do you have any fish? How are your nets? Are they hanging in the garage a little dusty and dry rot? Are we just out there fishing and hoping that the fish are going to jump into our boats? Well, wouldn't that be nice? Guys, I think that a new day is coming. A new day for the churches of this area, for Montezuma, for the Church of Christ. The day is coming where it's time that we tend to our nets, that we prepare for the catch that Jesus is bringing to the way of this congregation. Friends, that means that something's going to change. It means that we're going to have to step out of our comfort zone and to do things a little bit differently. And change is uncomfortable. Peter was not comfortable jumping into the water. Imagine, he put his clothes on to swim to shore. That's not very comfortable. But if we want to catch fish, then we have to do something. Imagine if the disciples had ignored that weird guy on the shore and just kept on fishing on the left side of the boat. They'd have missed the biggest catch that awaited them. So here's my challenge. Here's where I see that God is leading us and calling us to do. And that's to be fishers of people. So how can we, as Zuma Church, so every person that walks in that door right there, that they are loved unconditionally? Isn't that what we all want? Is just to know that we are loved? That we are part of something bigger than ourselves? That God's grace and favor is here? Now imagine if we had people waiting at that door every Sunday to greet every person who entered this building. Now we might all know each other, right? That's okay. But we want new people to come in. And so imagine if we had people ready to greet them and to make them feel welcome. Imagine those people who have been out working all night, fishing, that are tired, that are smelly, that are wet, that just need some food that only Christ can provide. How can we help these who are gathered here? How can we help each other out in God's mission to make disciples? How are we caring for the fish that are already here? Jesus bought breakfast. How can we take the time to send a birthday card or a sympathy card or a thinking of you card or a thank you card to one person who's already here with us? How do you think that would impact the people who are here now? Friends, there's new programs or magical classes going to be people flocking to Zuma. What will bring people flocking to this place is a place that shows them unconditional love, where they are welcomed no matter what. Jesus has given us everything we need to love one another. There is very much a cost involved, but it's not in dollars and cents. It's in love. You know what? It's hard to love people sometimes. As I have a 2-year-old who hasn't. We're working on potty training. One of the hardest places that I find to show love to my son is through that. But I'm called to love him no matter what. And I do. I love Charlie Bear more than anything. But guess what? You want to see Matt get grumpy? There it is. And we all have those days, right? We all have those days where it's just, we want to smack the ones we love because they're driving us crazy. So Zuma Church, do we have any fish? Are we fishing on the right side of the boat? Are we ready to go where Jesus is leading us to radically welcome people into this place? If we are, then we have to understand that things will change. That's what happens when you fish on the right side of the boat. Now, I'm not talking big, drastic, huge changes. I'm talking, you might have to sit someplace else. I'm sorry. Or things might look a little different. We can handle that, right?
Yeah.
But let's be something amazing. Jesus is really asking, do you love me? And to imagine Jesus is here, standing in front of you, calls you by name, and says, Matt, son of Scott, do you love me? Dean, do you love me? Connie, do you love me? Droz, do you love me? Vicky, do you love me? Joy, do you love me? Take your name and say, do you love me? Because what Jesus' next question is, or Jesus' response to that question is, feed my sheep, care for my people. Whether they be the people sitting next to you, the person next door, or the weird people that live across the street. That would be us. Do you love me? Let's pray. God, we don't fully understand your ways, but we know that you love us. God, help us not to be like Peter, who just jumps the gun and swims to shore and leaves everybody else behind. Help us to be part of something bigger than ourselves, so that we can show your love to so many more people. Help us to be welcoming and radically hospitable to all of your children. Help us to be fishing on the right side of the boat. We pray this in the name of Jesus the Christ, our Lord and Savior.